going to be doing is, though it's late in the evening or early morning, we're going to do a look at Karl Marx. He's had a big impact on the 20th century, and even today, he has a big impact. So we'll begin. Karl Marx was born in 5th of May. He was a German, born in 5th of May 1818, and died 14th of March 1883. He was a philosopher, a political theorist, an economist, a journalist, and a revolutionary socialist. He is known for his 1848 pamphlet, The Communist Manifesto, written in conjunction with Friedrich Engels. He wrote a 3-volume work called Das Kapital. He wrote that under severe suffering. He was a man who didn't have much finances throughout his life, depended on his friends' money, so he knew what it was to suffer, and he never really got any income from his Das Kapital. It was only after he died that his family, his children, began to get the royalties for that book. Well, Das Kapital was written in 1867 to 1894, and it was a critique of classical political economy. He had the idea of historical materialism, analyzing capitalism, and his ideas were subsequently developed collectively into the idea of Marxism, which had an enormous influence, and we'll get into that. Born in Trier in the Kingdom of Prussia, Marx studied at the University of Bonn and the University of Berlin. He received a doctoral degree in philosophy at the University of Jena in 1841, and he was known as one of the great young Hegelians. He was influenced by George William Friedrich Hegel. If you remember, Hegel taught the idea of thesis, antithesis, and synthesis, but it was idealistic, meaning it was about ideas conflicting. And what Karl Marx did, he said, right, okay, there are these conflicts, but we'll reduce it down to the material. And so that's what he did. And so there was antithesis, synthesis in the material realm, and he particularly applied that to economics and politics. He critiqued and developed Hegel's ideas in the works, in one of his works, The German Ideology, written in 1846, Grundreis, which was written in 1857, 1858. In Paris, he wrote the Economic and Philosophic Manuscript of 1844 and met Engels, who became his closest friend and collaborator. After moving to Brussels in 1845, they were active in the Communist League, and in 1848, they wrote the Communist Manifesto, which expressed Marx's ideas and lays out a program for revolution. Marx was expelled from Belgium and Germany in 1849, moved to London, where he wrote the 18 Brumaire of Louis Bonaparte, 1852, and Des Capital. From 1864, Marx was involved in the International Working Men's Association, in which he fought the influence of anarchists led by Mikhail Bakunin. In his critique of the Gotha program in 1875, Marx wrote on revolution and the state and transition to communism. He died stateless in 1883 and was buried at the Highgate Cemetery. Whether you like Marx or not, he had a powerful influence. Hi, Ryan. God bless you, bro. Whether you like Marx or not, he had a powerful influence on the history of ideas. Marx's critique of history, society, and political economy hold that human societies develop through class conflict. In the capitalist mode of production, this manifests itself in the conflict between the ruling class, i.e. the bourgeoisie, that control the means of production, and the working classes, i.e. the proletariat, that enable these means by selling their labour power for wages. What you need to understand with Karl Marx is he experienced poverty himself. He also saw poverty in the Industrial Revolution. He saw many people suffering in the Industrial Revolution, and people coming out of pits covered in soot, getting a meager pay, people enslaved, not able to get a decent living. And as I said before, he suffered tremendously himself. And so that was his experience. But one of the major problems with his thesis is the idea is that those who are the capitalists, those who are the bourgeoisie, those who own the means of production, the problem with his thesis is they are the evil ones, and the proletariat are the goody-goodies. The working class are the goody-goodies. And so just give the working class all the wealth, and everything's going to be okay, so long as everybody's equal in wealth. The problem is that there's good and bad in everything. There's good and bad in the middle class, and there's good and bad in the working class. There's no pure class. There's no angelic class that's pure, and that's the problem of his thesis. So for him, the revolution is to take place where the working class overtake the ruling class, and then eventually there will be a dictatorship of the proletariat, only for a short time, supposedly, and then eventually everything will ease out to equality, which it never happened, and it's never happened, because when you have Lenin, the revolution in Russia, and the revolution in China with Chairman Mao, the ruling class of the proletariat did not give up the power. They became a dictatorship and continue to be a dictatorship. So the whole problem of this issue of the bourgeoisie and the working class is there's no perfect angelic class, and that's one of the main pitfalls of Karl Marx, is virtue signaling for the working class, when actually the ruling class and the working class, they are all imperfect. Employing his historical materialist approach, Marx predicated that capitalism produced internal tensions like previous social economic systems. These tensions would lead to self-destruction and replacement by a new system known as the socialist mode of production. For Marx, class antagonism under capitalism, owing in part to its instability and crisis-prone nature, would eventuate the working class development of class consciousness, leading to the conquest of political power and eventually the establishment of classless communist society, constituted by a free association of producers. Marx actively pressed for its implementation, arguing that the working class should carry out organized proletarian revolution. And so there came within Marxism a kind of two camps, and you can see that in Russia. You had the Bolsheviks, who wanted armed revolution. They wanted to take the revolution militarily. And then you had another group whose name has just left me, and they wanted a revolution, but they wanted to do it politically without violence. But Lenin's group won through. Marx has been one of the most influential figures in modern history. So let's go back and look at his early childhood and education. As one said, Marx was born on the 5th of May, 1818, to Hendrix Mark and Henrietta Presburg at Brucken-Gies, 664, Trier, then part of the Kingdom of Prussia. Marx's family was originally non-religious Jewish, but had converted formally to Christianity before his birth. This was a big problem in Karl Marx's life because he always resented Christianity. He always hated Christianity because he felt his family, who were Jewish, only converted to Lutheranism out of expediency. And this was a paternal difficulty, pain in Karl Marx's life. His maternal grandfather was Dutch rabbi, while his paternal line had supplied Trier's rabbi since 1723, a role taken by his grandfather, Meir Halevi Marx. His father was the first in line to receive a secular education. He became a lawyer with a comfortably upper middle class income, and the family owned a number of Moselle vineyards in addition to his income as an attorney. After Prussia's annexation of the Rhineland in 1815 and the subsequent abrogation of Jewish emancipation, Henrik converted from Judaism to the State Evangelical Church of Prussia in order to retain his career as a lawyer. Largely non-religious, Heinrich was a man of the Enlightenment, interested in the ideas of philosophy of Immanuel Kant, Voltaire. A classical liberal, he took part in agitation for a constitution and reform in Prussia, which was then an absolute monarchy. In 1815, Heinrich Marx began working as an attorney. In 1890, he moved his family to a 10-room property near Port Niagara. His wife, Henrietta Presburg, was a Dutch Jew from a prosperous business family that later founded the company Philips Electronics. Her sister, Sophie Presburg, married Lion Philips and was the grandmother of both Gerard and Anton Philips and the great-grandmother of Fritz Philips. Lion Philips was a wealthy Dutch tobacco manufacturer, an industrialist upon whom Karl and Jenny Marx would later come and rely for loans while they were exiled in London. Marx, the third of 9 children, he became the eldest son when his brother Moritz died in 1819. Marx and his surviving siblings were baptized into the Lutheran Church on the 28th of August 1824, and their mother in November 1825. Marx was privately educated by his father until 1830, when he entered the Trier High School, whose headmaster, Hugo Wittenberg, was a friend of his father. By employing many liberal humanists as teachers, Wittenberg incurred the anger of the local conservative government. In 1832, police raided the school and discovered that literature promoting political liberalism was being distributed among the students. Viewing the distribution of such material as a seditious act, the authorities implemented reforms and replaced several members of the staff during Marx's time at the school. So you can see right at the early on, Karl Marx is experiencing radical political movements and has been influenced by Enlightenment thinking, Enlightenment philosophy from his father and from his teachers. In October 1835, at the age of 16, Marx travelled to the University of Bonn, wishing to study philosophy and literature, but his father instead insisted on law as a more practical field. Due to conditions referred to as weak chess, Marx was excused from military duty when he turned 18. And while at the University of Bonn, Marx joined the Poets Club, a group containing political radicals that were monitored by the police. Marx also joined the Trier Tavern Club drinking society and at one point served as the club's president. In August 1836, he took part in a duel with a member of the University of Prussian Corps. Although his grades in the first terms were good, they deteriorated, leading his father to force a transfer to the more serious and academic University of Berlin. So we can see already a radicalness built within Karl Marx, which would go deep into his writing and his thinking. He was a man for revolution. Hegelianism and early journalism, 1836 to 1843. This is a seminal time because Hegelianism had a big influence on him. Spending summer and autumn in 1836 in Trier, Marx became more serious about his studies and his life. He became engaged to Jenny von Westenblen, a very plain-looking lady, but an educated member of the petty nobility who had known Marx since childhood. As she had broken off her engagement with a young aristocrat to be with Marx, their relationship was socially controversial owing to the differences between their religious and class origins. But Marx befriended her father, Ludwig von Wetzstein, a liberal aristocrat, and later dedicated his doctoral thesis to him. 7 years after their engagement, on 19th of June 1843, they married in a Protestant church in Krusnack. She had no idea what she had married herself into. She'd actually married herself into a great deal of suffering, because Karl Marx was not to have very much money throughout his life. Throughout his life, he struggled, and so his wife would carry that burden and pain herself. In October 1836, Marx arrived in Berlin, matriculating in the University Faculty of Law and renting a room in the Metallurgies. During the first term, Marx attended the lecture of Edward Gans, who represented the progressive Hegelian standpoint and elaborated on rational development in history by emphasizing particularity, its libertarian aspects, and the importance of a social question, and of Karl von Savigny, who represented the historical school of law. Although studying law, he was fascinated by philosophy and looked for a way to combine the two, believing that without philosophy, nothing could be accomplished. Marx became interested in recently deceased German philosopher George Hegel, whose ideas were then widely debated among European philosophical circles. During a convalescence in Strahlau, he joined the Doctors' Club, a student group which discussed Hegelian ideas, and through them became involved in a group of radical thinkers known as the Young Hegelians in 1837. They gathered around Ludwig Feuerbach and Bruno Bauer, with Marx developing a particular close friend with Adolf Rutenberg. Like Marx, the Young Hegelians were critical of Hegel's metaphysical assumptions, but adopted his dialectical method to criticize established society, politics, and religion from a left-wing perspective. Marx's father died in May 1838, resulting in a diminished income for the family. Marx had been emotionally close to his father and treasured his memory after his death. But let me just backtrack a minute. If you remember, I mentioned Ludwig Feuerbach. This is important because I want you to see in a graph, imagine Hegelian dialectical dialect as number one, and then number two, Ludwig Feuerbach's ideas, and then the third tier, Karl Marx. Hegelian dialectic is the idea of thesis, antithesis, and synthesis, but it's idealistic, meaning it's dealing with earth-real ideas. The ideas are in conflict, and then there will be a synthesis. Now, Ludwig Feuerbach took this from ideas and applied it to religion. He had the idea of psychogenesis, where man really, from his own ability, has created images of himself when he talks about the divine. So Ludwig Feuerbach wrote about when we talk about God and the nature of God, it comes from our inner self. So we're not actually talking about an objective God. It's a God created out of our own imagination. But he took Hegelian ideas and applied it to religion. He used Christian language, and it could sound very devotional and very uplifting in many ways, but actually it was not advocating an objective God, but a God out of our own making. So you have the Hegelian idealism, you have Ludwig Feuerbach with his religious concept that has been created by man. And so what Karl Marx was thinking is, I don't want to do this Hegelian idea stuff. I want to apply this antithesis synthesis. I don't want to apply it to religion like Ludwig Feuerbach. I want to apply it to economics. I want to apply it there. I want to apply it to materialism, the things that we can touch and feel. So that is what Karl Marx was doing. And so you need to understand the connection between Hegel, Ludwig Feuerbach, and Karl Marx. You have to understand the connection between Hegelian ideas, Ludwig Feuerbach, who was a major influence in the intellectual life of the 19th century, and Karl Marx. By 1837, Marx had completed a short novel, Scorpion and Felix, a drama, Orlanum, and a number of love poems dedicated to his wife. None of this early work was published during his lifetime. The love poems were published posthumously in the collected works of Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels. Volume 1. Marx soon abandoned fiction for other pursuits, including the study of English and Italian art history and the translation of Latin classics. He began cooperating with Bruno Barr on editing Hegel's Philosophy of Religion in 1840, and Marx was also engaged in writing his doctrinal thesis, The Difference Between the Democritian and the Epicurean Philosophy of Nature, which he completed in 1841. It was described as a daring and original piece of work in which Marx set out to show that theology must yield to superior wisdom of philosophy. The essay was controversial, particularly among the conservative professors at the University of Berlin, and Marx decided instead to submit his thesis to the more liberal University of Jena, whose faculty awarded him his PhD in April 1841. As Marx and Barr were both atheists, in March 1841 they began plans for a journal entitled Atheist Archives, but it never came to fruition. In July, Marx and Barr took a trip to Bonn from Berlin, and there they scandalized the class by getting drunk, laughing in church, and galloping through the streets on donkeys. Marx was considering an academic career, but his path was barred by the government growing opposition to classical liberalism and the young Hegelians. Marx moved to Cologne in 1842, where he became a journalist, writing for the radical newspaper Rhineland News, expressing his early views on socialism and his developing interest in economics. Marx criticized right-wing European governments as well as figures in the liberal and social movements, whom he thought ineffective and counterproductive. The newspaper attracted the attention of the Prussian government censors, who checked every issue for seditious material printing, which Marx lamented. Our newspaper has to be presented, quote, our newspaper has to be presented to the police to be sniffed at, and if the police smells anything unchristian or un-Prussian, the newspaper is not allowed to appear. After this publication, an article strongly criticizing the Russian monarchy, Tsar Nicholas I, requested it to be banned, and Prussian government complied in 1843. So we can see how radical, how revolutionary the very nature of Karl Marx was. Paris in 1843 to 1845. In 1843, Marx became a co-editor of a new radical left-wing Parisian newspaper, the German-French Annals, then being set up by the German activist Arnold Rudge to bring together German and French radicals. Therefore, Marx and his wife moved to Paris in October 1843, initially living with the Rouge and his wife communally at 23 Rue Vanneau. They found the living conditions difficult, so moved out following the birth of their daughter Jenny in 1844. Although intended to attract writers from both France and German states, a publication was dominated by the later and only non-German writer was the exiled Russian anarchist collectivist Mikhail Bakum. Marx contributed 2 essays to the paper Introduction to Contribution to the Critique of Hegel's Philosophy of Right, and on the Jewish question, later introducing his belief that the proletariat were a revolutionary force and marking his embrace of communism. Only one issue was published, but it was relatively successful, largely owing to the inclusion of Heinrich Heine's satirical odes to King Ludwig of Bavaria, leading the German states to ban it and seize imported copies. After the collapse of this publication, Marx began writing for another publication called Forwards, the only remaining uncensored German-language radical newspaper. Based in Paris, the paper was connected to the League of the Just, a utopian socialist secret society of workers and artisans. Marx attended some of their meetings but did not join. In this publication, Marx refined his views on socialism based on Hegelian and Feuerbach ideas of dialectical materialism, at the same time criticizing liberals and other socialists operating in Europe. On the 20th of August 1844, Marx met the German socialist Friedrich Engels at the Café of de la Regagne, beginning a lifelong friendship. Engels showed Marx his recently published The Conditions of Working Class of England in 1844, convincing Marx that the working class would be the agent and instrument of the final revolution in history. Soon Marx and Engels were collaborating on criticism of the philosophical ideas of Marx's former friend Bruno Bauer. This work was published in 1845 as The Holy Family. Although critical of Bauer, Marx was increasingly influenced by the idea of the young Hegelians Max Steiner and Ludwig Feuerbach, but eventually Marx and Engels abandoned Feuerbachian materialism as well. During the time that he lived at 38 Rue Vanu in Paris, from October 1843 until January 1845, Marx engaged in an intensive study of political economy. He studied Adam Smith, David Ricardo, James Mill, etc. The French socialists, especially Claude Henry Saint-Simon and Charles Fourier, and the history of France. The study of and critique of political economy is a project that Marx would pursue for the rest of his life, and would result in his major economic work, the 3-volume series called Das Kapital. Marx is based in large part on 3 influences: Hegel's dialectics, French utopian socialism, and British political economy. Together with his early study of Hegelian dialectics, the studying that Marx did during his time in Paris meant that all his major opponents of Marxism components of Marxism were in place by the autumn of 1844. Marx was constantly being pulled away from his critique of political economy, not only by the usual daily demands of time, but additionally by editing a radical newspaper, and later by organizing and directing the efforts of political party during the years of potentially revolutionary popular uprisings of the citizenry. Still, Marx was always drawn back to his studies, where he sought to understand the inner workings of capitalism. An outline of Marxism definitely formed in the mind of Karl Marx by late 1844. Indeed, many features of Marxism's view of the world have been worked out in great detail. But Marx needed to write down all the details of his worldview to further clarify the new critique of political economy in his own mind. One has to understand that when it came to being a writer, Karl Marx was a perfectionist. When he was studying to write his major work, Des Capital, he constantly rewrote it because he wanted to get it perfectly right. Accordingly, Marx wrote the economic and philosophical manuscripts, and these manuscripts covered numerous topics detailing Marx's concept of alienated labor. By the spring of 1845, his continued study of political economy, capitalism, and capitalism had led Marx to the belief that the new critique of political economy he was espousing, that of scientific socialism, needed to be built on the base of a thoroughly developed materialistic worldview. The economic and philosophical manuscripts of 1844 had been written between April and August 1844, but soon Marx recognized that the manuscripts had been influenced by some inconsistent ideas of Ludwig Feuerbach. Accordingly, Marx recognized the need to break with Feuerbach philosophy in favor of historical materialism, which I pointed out earlier in this talk. Thus, a year later, by April 1845, after moving from Paris to Brussels, Marx wrote his 11 theses on Feuerbach. The theses on Feuerbach are best known as Thesis 11, which states that the philosophers have only interpreted the world in various ways. The point is to change it. This work contains Marx's criticism of materialism for being contemplative, idealism for reducing practice to theory, and overall philosophy for putting abstract reality above the physical world. It thus introduced the first glimpse of Marx's historical materialism, an argument that the world is changed not by ideas but by actual physical material activity and practice. In 1845, after receiving a request from the Prussian king, the French government shut down his publication, with the Interior Minister Franz Guzon expelling Marx from France. So we now see Karl Marx's life in Brussels from 1845 to 1848. Unable either to stay in France or to move to Germany, Marx decided to emigrate to Brussels in Belgium in February 1845. However, to stay in Belgium, he had to pledge not to publish anything on the subject of contemporary politics. In Brussels, Marx associated with other exiled socialists from across Europe, including Moses Hess, Karl Heinz, and Joseph Wedemeyer. In April 1845, Engels moved from Bremen in Germany to Brussels to join Marx and the growing cadre of members of the League of the Just, now seeking home in Brussels. Later, Mary Bones, not related to me, folks, Engels' longtime companion, left Manchester, England to join Engels in Brussels. In mid-July 1845, Marx and Engels left Brussels for England to visit the leaders of the Chartist and working class movement in Britain. This was Marx's first trip to England, and Engels was an ideal guide for the trip. Engels had already spent 2 years living in Manchester from 1842 to August 1844. Not only did Engels already know the English language, but he had also developed a close relationship with many of the Chartist leaders. Indeed, Engels was serving as a reporter for many Chartist socialist English newspapers. Marx used the trip as an opportunity to examine the economic resources available for study in various libraries in London and Manchester. In collaboration with Engels, Marx also set up about writing a book which is often seen as his best treatment of the concept of historical materialism in his book, The German Ideology. In this work, Marx broke with Ludwig Feuerbach and others and the rest of the young Hegelians, while he also broke with Karl Grun and other true socialists, whose philosophies were still based in part on idealism. In German Ideology, Marx and Engels finally completed their philosophy, which was based solely on materialism as the sole motor force in history. German Ideology was a book written in humorously satirical form, but even this satirical form did not save the work from censorship. Like so many other early writings of his, German Ideology would not be published in Marx's lifetime and was published in 1932. After completing German Ideology, Marx turned to a work that was intended to clarify his own position regarding the theory and tactics of true revolutionary proletarian movement, operating from the standpoint of a truly scientific materialist philosophy. This work was intended to draw a distinction between the utopian socialist and Marx's own scientific socialist philosophy. Whereas the utopians believed that people must be persuaded one person at a time to join the socialist movement, the way a person must be persuaded to adopt any different belief, Marx knew that people would tend, on most occasions, to act in accordance with their own economic interest, thus appealing to an entire class, the working class in this case, with a broad appeal to the class' best material interest would be the best way to mobilize the broad mass of that class to make a revolution and change society. This was the intent of the new book that Marx was planning, but to get the manuscript past the government censors, he called the book The Poverty of Philosophy, and offered it as a response to the petty bourgeoisie philosophy of the French and the anarchist socialist Pierre-Joseph Proudhon, as expressed in his book The Philosophy of Poverty in 1840. These books laid the foundation for Engels and Marx's most famous work, a political pamphlet that has since come to be known as the Communist Manifesto. While residing in Brussels in 1846, Marx continued his association with the secret radical organization League of the Just. As noted above, Marx thought the League to be just the sort of radical organization that was needed to spur the working class of Europe towards the mass movement that would bring about a working class revolution. However, to organize the working class into a mass movement, the League had to cease its secret or underground orientation and operate in the open as a political party. Members of the League eventually became persuaded in this regard, and accordingly, in June 1847, the League was reorganized by its membership into a new, open, above-ground political society that appealed directly to the working class. This new open political society was called the Communist League. Both Marx and Engels participated in drawing up the program and organizational principles of the new Communist League. In 1847, Marx and Engels began writing what was to become their most famous work, a program of action for the Communist League. Written jointly by Marx and Engels from December 1847 to January 1848, the Communist Manifesto was first published on the 21st of February 1848. The Communist Manifesto laid out the beliefs of the new Communist League. No longer a secret society, the Communist League wanted to make aims and intentions clear to the general public, rather than hiding its beliefs as the League of Just had been doing. The opening lines of the pamphlet set forth the principal basis of Marxism, i.e., the history of all hereafter existing society is the history of class struggle. It goes on to examine the antagonisms that Marx claimed were arising in the clashes of interest between the bourgeoisie, i.e., the wealthy capitalist, and the proletariat, i.e., the working class. Proceeding on from this, the manifesto presents the argument for why the Communist League, as opposed to the other socialist and liberal political parties and groups at the time, was truly acting in the interest of the proletariat to overthrow capitalist society and to replace it with socialism. So So that's just a little introduction to Karl Marx. There's a lot more to go into, but I just wanted to bring your attention to Karl Marx. It gives you a little bit of a flavor to him. There's a ton more that could be said, but he had a big impact in many countries, like the Russian Revolution, the Chinese Revolution of Chairman Mao, and a lot of the identity politics that we see with gay rights and transgenderism and all that can be traced back to Karl Marx. And the reason is because one of the main ideas of Karl Marx is the oppressed and the oppressor. There's always someone being oppressed, and we need to stand up for those who are being oppressed. And so that kind of idea can be seen in the gay pride movement. It can be seen in the transgender movement. And also that radical revolutionary style that was in Marxism, which is all about overthrowing the existing order and has always been Antichrist, was also part of the gay rights movement and transgenderism, also taking some of the Marxian ideas of revolution. So we could have gone on a lot more, we could have explored it a lot more, but I hope I've given you a little taste of Karl Marx. There's far more information to go on in, but I think that will be enough for the time being. I hope that it's blessed you. I hope it's been a help to you. And he had a major impact in the 20th century. He still got a big impact today. And he was very anti-Christian. And his ideas were ultimately, really, his De Capitale was really a massive assault or attack upon Christianity, because, you see, the bourgeoisie had an idea of the importance of hard work. And Des Capital and Karl Marx's ideas wanted to rip that down and rip it into shreds. And so it was a massive attack upon Christianity. So I'm going to go. It's late here now, but I hope that this will inspire you to think a bit more about these ideas. I've enjoyed recently studying the life and thought of Karl Marx, and I hope that what I've shared might be of interest to you. God bless you.